Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Lemkel. I am the OPWDD statewide Willowbrook liaison, and I just want to thank everybody for participating in this very important WebEx that we pulled together rather quickly, and it's regarding the process flow for the Willowbrook class members needing decision-making for their choice of care coordination organizations. Just so I know there are a lot of MSCs out there listening in. If you have class members who are in an ICF and receiving WCS services, this process really is not applicable to you. However, you may have other folks who are in an IRA setting and who receive MSC. So that would be important for you to listen to it as it relates to those individuals. Again, we apologize for the short notice on this, and we do appreciate your flexibility, which will enable you to listen to this. Also, as with previous MSC information sessions, a recording of this presentation will be posted on the OPWDD People First Care Coordination webpage for you to review, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint that we're going to be using today. I also would like just to take a moment to introduce you to folks that are going to be potentially presenters, asking questions and assisting. Kate Bishop, the Director of Person-Centered Supports, who you may know because Kate has also presented at many of the Wednesday MSC information sessions. Also, we have Angie Francis, who is our statewide MSC coordinator. Megan Glass, who is with our waiver and managed care unit. And also, we have Antonia Ferguson, Tawny, who is the Executive Director for the Community Advisory Board, the CAB, who is also joining us, and that we find that will be very, very helpful with some of the questions. So I'm going to ask Kate, I'm just going to turn it over to Kate, and she'll go through this process, and you can just follow along with the PowerPoint.
Good afternoon, everyone, and again, I second Lori's thanks for joining as on the call, because we know people have been actively awaiting some of this information, and we hope that today's session, in cooperation with Antonia Ferguson, Tawny, will be real helpful to you as we move forward with implementing a consistent process that we hope will help everyone. This decision-making flow relates really to some of the trainings that have already been done, so we're hoping that you have participated in or have been able to look at the training on the web page that's posted associated with decision making, because that gives more detail about kind of the legal authority for who's making decisions and what the hierarchical flow of decision makers are and where the CAB fits into that process. So we think, this is a companion piece to that, and understanding and knowing that information will be helpful to you as well. So with that, our goal today is really to manage the communication related to decision making. As we have done with some of the other decision making processes, we're trying to make sure that there are some centralized points of communication, because you can imagine if everyone kind of reached out to a different person in an organization, there could be a lot of confusion and lost steps in a process for identifying who will be making a decision on somebody's behalf. So working with Tawny, we really came through a process of defining some central points of communication to make sure that for our Willowbrook class members that this important decision that they're making with regard to the choice of CCO as well as the choice of service level, be it health home care management or basic HCBS plan support, is really being made effectively and as smoothly as possible to reduce any kind of disruption for everyone. And then given the need, again, for consistency in that processing, we expect that there be some discussions about the options available for each person. We know, given all of that will need to take place, the decision-making process and those discussions, there's going to be a high volume of activity over the next several months. And I think, we all recognize that in going into these next several months. I think as much as we can work together and communicate any issues that arise, the better off we're going to be. So, we know it's not going to be easy for the next several months, but we're working together. We can achieve as smooth a process as is possible given the systems change that we're undergoing. So let's talk a bit about the process flow. And this is for both class members who are fully represented by the Consumer Advisory Board and others who will need the CAB as their decision maker. So we're going to kind of distinguish a little bit between those two groups as we go through this flow, but you know, this is a process that's meant to address the needs for both groups of people. So just to maintain that continuity and, again, that single point of contact, we're asking that each of the MSC agencies identify who is served as Willowbrook class members on all of the MSC caseloads. So again, to maintain some consistency of process, the flow will begin with all of you as service coordinators identifying who are being served by the organization within which you work, the MSC agency, and having the CEO, whoever the CEO designates, identify the full listing of people who are class members served by the MSC agency. And in that way, what we'll be able to do over time is start to look at, here are people we are presuming will need decisions from the CAB. Here are people who appear to have an identified decision maker, but we'll need to watch and see if that person in fact makes the decision for them. And lastly, there may be people who are able to make their own decisions in this regard, and we want to make sure we're tracking those people as well. So the goal is to look over time and make sure that where decisions are being made or need to be made, that we start whittling away at that list. It's going to start with no one having a decision made, and hopefully in the near future there will be several decisions made and that number will be reduced. But the key thing to recall here is that this is through a centralized point of contact at that MSC agency. And so then the CEO of the MSC agency or their designee will send the completed spreadsheet, which is again all of the class members on that sheet, and packets of information for those people on the sheet who've been identified as needing CAB to make a decision for them. And those will go to Tawny Ferguson for distribution to the local CAB rep. So that packet of information will need to include the individualized information letter. So all of the MSC agencies get those letters. They have provided them in most instances to the MSCs who are responsible for the person whose individualized letter it is. And then the MSC will be identifying those people who are class members and put together a packet for the people who need a decision from CAB. The packet will include that letter. The letter specifically identifies for people, hopefully you've all seen them, but just to kind of share, the letters include the available CCOs within the region. They include the affiliation of the existing MSC provider with the CCO so that people know who the current MSC provider is affiliating with, if that's something that is occurring. And so it gives that specific information to the person so that they can make an informed choice. The person's current ISP needs to be included in that package, and then the consent forms that would be either the consent forms for the health home care management or basic HCBS plan support. So the consent forms for the Willowbrook class will, of course, all be adult forms. So there's no children involved. I know some of the other training we did on consent that you may have been participating in had a lot of discussion about children, but that won't be pertinent in this process flow. So to continue, for class members, again, both who are fully represented or those who may need the decision over time, the MSC will then schedule a meeting with the appropriate CAB rep. So you've got information going centrally to Tawny, then being dispersed back to the CAB reps, and then the MSC will schedule a time to talk to that CAB rep and the class member so that they can discuss the information that's in that packet, so the information letter so they know what their choices are, the ISP so they can look at what the person's current service package is, and I'm sure in most instances people will be quite familiar with this anyway, but certainly a review to make a decision is appropriate. and then determine what the appropriate enrollment decision would be based on any factors that people deem to be relevant in that decision making. The MSC is then going to document that decision in choices, the choices of the CCO, and the level of service, be it health home care management or basic plan support. So the MSC documents those in choices, and then the MSC will provide the signed consent forms and other required documents back to the CCO of the person's choice. And just to reiterate, and I know this was in the other training, but I'm just trying to kind of reinforce some of the things we get a lot of questions on. What needs to be shared back with the CCO is either the CAS or the DDP-2, the ISP for the person, and the LCED forms. So if that's available, the original; if that's not available, the most recent copy. But those LCED forms for people who are in the waiver would be able to be shared with the CCO, so they have them. Just like with a change in vendor, you need to share information with the new provider, and this is the process for sharing that information with the new provider. So for people who have a decision maker, and so that's kind of the end of that process for people who are getting CAB decisions for those who we know right up front need an enrollment decision, okay? So that's the process flow. Now we're going to shift into class members where there are decision makers available. Maybe they have an actively involved family. Maybe they're able to be their own decision, or you're determining if the person is able to be their own decision maker. But there's a review process of those available decision makers, and we think we've got someone who can make a decision. So if those people that we presume are going to make a decision become unavailable or are unresponsive, we need a process flow for what happens in those instances. So the MSC makes efforts. We really need to make sure that when there is a decision maker in place, that we're doing everything we can to engage that decision maker and to help them, support them to be able to make the decision for the person about the CCO and the level of service. So the MSC makes every effort to obtain a decision from the identified decision maker based on that list, and again, I refer you back to the training of April 11th. All efforts must be documented, so those efforts can include phone calls, emails, letters, but you need to document any effort to obtain a decision from the person who's been identified as a decision maker. After 3 unsuccessful attempts to obtain a decision from the identified decision maker, the MSC then kind of reverts back. This process is going to sound very familiar. It kind of reverts back to the process we just described for those people we knew right up front needed a decision from CAB. And what will occur is the MSC will notify the CEO of the MSC agency that a decision is needed from CAB. So you've made every attempt, you've documented those attempts, and now you're at a point where you need to defer to CAB, who has the legal authority under the emergency reg to make this decision on behalf of class members, just class members, who have a decision maker that is not responsive. So then the CEO of the MSC agency or their designee sends a new spreadsheet with the identified information for people who need a CAB decision, along with a packet of information to Tony Ferguson. So, that sounds very familiar to the last time through. The packet looks the same. It's an individualized information letter, again, that describes all the details about the person's available options. It will include the person's ISP, the consent forms for either health home care management or basic HCBS plan support. And this is an addition for these people who are in this category because someone who could make a decision were unavailable or unresponsive. Sometimes what we know is you have families who may live out of the area, they don't get the paperwork back, they don't act on some of the requests that have been made. So the addition to this packet that will go to Tawny is documentation that those 3 attempts were made to obtain a decision. So The reason for that is because when we're asking for an alternative decision maker, we're kind of saying, we know you would be available to make the decision. Maybe you even expressed a desire to make the decision, but you didn't follow up perhaps, or you were unavailable when we tried to reach you to ultimately make that decision. So Tawny, I'm sure, would want to know that due diligence was made and that people made every effort to reach out to those decision makers who could be available, but were for some reason not available. So those 3 attempts need to be documented, and there needs to be, that can be case notes. Most typically you're going to be seeing them in the MSC notes, and you'll send that on with the packet to Tawny for decision making. So for class members who are in this category of having decision makers who are unavailable or unresponsive, the executive director, meaning Tawny, or her designee will discuss all of that information with the MSC, so that she's going to get her packet, be able to look at everything, review the information, and then complete the consent form. So those will be able to be completed, and again, communicate back to the MSC with the completed consent forms, who will, same as last process, identify the choice within the choices system, and then provide the consent forms and the other required documents, same as the last process, to the CCO of the person's choice. So those are the process flows for both instances where CAB is involved in those decision-making processes. Some considerations just to think about as you begin to plan for this. Of course, all discussions should be focused on options and the best fit for the class member. So, thinking about what's going to make the best sense for the class member, thinking about what the current services and supports are, is really, I'm sure, what you do all the time as you pursue options for people and the decision-making that will be completed by either Tawny or the reps. I'm sure always include what is the best fit and the best outcome for the class members. The MSC may set up, so you're going to probably have several people who you are supporting, because we know Willowbrook caseloads tend to be pretty much, in many instances, kind of everyone you support is a member of the class in many instances because of the ratio differences. So there may be ways to create some efficient practices by setting up meetings that are consecutive between the MSC and the rep who's making the ultimate decision, so that you can kind of coordinate processes, coordinate and streamline those processes, so that hopefully it reduces the burden on everybody for a lot of scheduling and rescheduling and frequent meetings, if things could be done kind of in a couple meetings for groups of people, as long as they're person-centered and good discussions for true informed choice is part of that overall process. And with that, we have questions. I'm going to stop and see if, Tawny, do you have anything you want to add to that information that we just presented?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. So with that, unless anyone else wants to add anything, we can take some questions.
All right. So regarding the required attempts to contact a decision maker, does certified mail correspondence count as one of those attempts?
Yes, absolutely. Certified mail would count as an attempt to seek a decision. Yep.
Could you please review the timeline that consents and decisions need to be made?
We're looking for decisions to be made by June 1st. May 15th, if at all possible, but I think in this instance we did get a little bit of a delayed start. But June 1st is really the goal that we have, to really start to dig in really carefully and make sure that we've got people engaged. So by June 1st, that group of people that need, you should be able to make by that time frame those 3 attempts and have them documented. If for some reason you're not, you're finding that the decision maker who you thought could decide on someone's behalf is not available, we would certainly hope that that determination would be made by June 1st, which then gives that secondary process of getting the packets and the request into Tawny at central office a bit more time to be able to get resolved. So, you know, that's June 1st is really a good benchmark for recognizing where we are in those those enrollment decisions and the processes. Everything needs to be done, just to make sure, I'm pretty sure you're already aware of this, but I'll say it anyway. Everyone needs to have a decision as of June 30th in order for ongoing services to occur, because they'll need a care manager in place to monitor their support plan and to support the coordination needs for their ongoing waiver services. So the absolute final date is June 30th.
Right, and that would include the entry into the choice of selection form.
Yes.
Will the CAB local representative be making the CCO choice or taking it back to the board for approval?
Hi, this is Tawny Ferguson. Our board has already had their discussions, and directives have already been sent out to the CAB representatives on how the decision-making is to occur. So that won't be as if they get it and then they have to come back to me. We've already streamlined it from our end.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Tawny, for responding to that.
If a family has declined CAB full or co-rep but are unwilling or unresponsive, do we follow this process?
So let me just make sure that I'm clear, and we may need Lori and Tawny's input on this, but for someone who has declined to have either full or partial representation from CAB and has a decision maker, but I'm assuming they're not their own decision maker, if they have an alternate decision maker, and they are not responding, we need to make a distinction of whether or not they're not responding because they don't want care coordination and continued waiver services, which is a choice that people could make. But if they want to maintain their waiver services and it's more of an unavailability issue with the decision maker, then they could default to the CAB decision-making process for a decision.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here for a minute.
Yep.
If the person if there is no response, OPWDD put out emergency regulations to address this specific issue to ensure that people getting waiver services continue to get their services, including the class members. So if they do not respond in the time frames that have been identified here today, regulatory decisions have been implemented in order that specify it would then come to us, whether or not we co-represent them or fully represent them. We will, just because they don't respond does not mean that status will change. It means, however, that they will be able to continue with their mandated Willowbrook entitlement of care management.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tawny.
What exact information needs to be included on the spreadsheet that goes to Tawny? And how is this submitted, electronically or through the mail?
Okay, so the spreadsheet has 2 pages. There are very simple step-by-step instructions on the second page, so I'm thinking that perhaps the person who's asking hasn't moved over to the instructions yet. It outlines what information there is.
I think they haven't seen the sheet yet, so we'll be sending that. We'll be sending that out.
For those who receive co-representation, is the family member who co-reps with CAB the first and only decision maker if that person is reached and able to make a decision?
If we co-represent and the family signs the consent, and they do when the service coordinator first attempts, they are the person that signs the consent. There are family members who have already reached out to their representative that works with them. I expect and I anticipate that to occur for a number of the class members, but we will not be signing. If the family signs, then they sign, just as it is typically. It's the regulatory guidelines will kick in when and if you do not get a response from the identified correspondent.
Thank you, Tony.
Was that, I hope that was clear.
Yes, that's very clear. Thank you.
If the Willowbrook class member has full CAB but is able to discuss with their MSC about their own person-centered choice, is the CAB required to meet with the MSC and the member to discuss their choice?
Tony, do you want to respond to that one as well?
Yes, I would expect that the CAB representative would be made aware of any meetings that you're having with a class member when we are involved with them, even when the person signs their own documents. That's an ongoing practice, and I wouldn't expect that to change in this situation.
Okay. So I think that's helpful and that's clear. Just just to reiterate, for the MSCs, even if the person is able to sign on their own behalf because of their ability to make an informed choice, as with other practices, the CAB rep should be part of that dialogue, and I think that's a good point of clarification that we just want to make sure everyone gets.
Will the local CAB representative be able to sign in person?
In person.
In person, excuse me.
Yes, I mean, I think just this is another thing that was covered in the other training, but the signatures for the consent forms are like original signatures, ink on paper, and those are the original forms that need to be shared with the CCO. So the person needs to be in proximity to the form in order to sign the form.
So to clarify, for people who have an unresponsive decision maker, once we submit to Tawny, who signs the form?
For someone who has an unresponsive decision maker, it's either Tawny or a designee that she's provided, but it would go back through Tawny. And Tawny, is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly what we decided. That's what's in the PowerPoint.
Yep.
For those individuals residing with family care, who makes that decision?
It would be the same scenario, that whether they live in a certified residential IRA or family care, the same process flow, the same identified decision makers would take place.
Will individuals receiving WCS transition to CCOs on July 1st? And if so, what process for consent is being used for them?
That's a great question, because I know there have been questions that have come up on this. And for people who are receiving WCS, our goal in working with the CAB to plan for this transition is that the people would maintain continuity of care by transitioning with their current service coordinator, turning care manager into the CCO world as they move into the CCO. So they don't need to go through this specific consent process because decisions have been made relative to continuity of care for that transition to take place.
There was a couple of questions just seeking clarification on how information should be sent to Tawny. Is it through the mail? Is it email?
So which email box is what they probably want to know, because it should always be done through email.
No, I'm sorry, this is Tawny. When we talked about this, it was decided that because this is going to be so voluminous, they need to send it to us via snail mail.
Right, and
also because of the fact that you want wet signatures, not electronic signatures, which means that we're going to get it here, and we've already set up our process internally that we will turn it around. It'll go out most likely in the next day's mail just because of the timing that we get it and the next day. But due to the volume, nobody will be able to successfully send all of this in an email.
Yep, that's,
Right, the attachments. And
that's what, thank you.
And I sincerely apologize to all of the MSCs because I know over the years I have begged and pleaded for everything to be sent on email. I did acquiesce on this one, though, because of the volume. So snail mail it is.
Yeah, and I think you make a good...
It doesn't need to be certified. Just, make sure you have the correct address, that you have my name on it, attention to CAB. Our mailroom, we're going to give them the heads up that I'm expecting this volume of mail over the next probably 7 to 10 days. So we've already worked our end to make sure this process goes as smoothly as possible from our end.
Directly to the Staten Island main office. Make sure you're doing it there.
Can we make sure, is there a way to get the address out to everybody? I mean, I can give it to you right now. I mean, I know you should have it, but just to ensure it's 1050, which is 1050 Forest, F-O-R-E-S-T, Hill Road. That's on Staten Island, and our zip code is 10314.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can Willowbrook class members choose to enroll in the basic HCBS plan support option? And if so, what are the monthly face-to-face meeting requirements?
Well, I mean, I think that if a person is independently making their decision, and that's the way that question reads, and they can choose either of the options. We've built all the entitlements into the health home care management option, so that's the option that really has all of the permanent injunction entitlements built into it, with the guarantees around caseload and monthly meeting requirements. So that's, but the choice is between the two service options.
If the information, the CCO letter and the consent packet was already sent to the CAB representative, does this information need to be resent, or can that representative now set up a meeting to discuss and move forward?
So it was sent to the information, I'm sorry, Angie, I missed the beginning part of that question. Was it sent to the central, to Tawny, or was it sent to the local rep?
It says sent to it appears to be the local rep. So the local rep has. Right,
I think that people will have to send to Tawny. Tawny, would you agree with that? You don't want something to go outside of the process we just defined?
Yeah, it needs to go through the process. That includes the spreadsheet, which is what,
Right.
I had attempted to address this earlier, and if you have sent it to the Staten Island office, to be very honest, I'm not interested in having to sort through the number of letters that I received to see which ones I have and which ones I don't. So this is the process. This is the process that needs to be followed by the MSC agency, and do not go out of it. I respectfully request that because it will just, it'll create more problems than it will help.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanted to make sure that, we had an agreed upon process like this so that it was clear and people didn't kind of get lost in thinking that they were in line for a decision when in fact they weren't in the right line. So we would like everyone to work through this process flow.
If an MSC is having difficulty making contact with a CAB representative, who should they contact to ensure that this process can be completed by June 30th?
Tony, would you like to be notified in those instances?
Of course I would.
Yeah, thank you.
Could you just please, again, provide some clarification about when the spreadsheet will be going out, who will be sending it, and will it be going to MSCs or MSC supervisors?
So it will go out by the end of today, along with, we will put the address that Tawny just requested people use in that email as well. And all of the communications around enrollment for individuals are going to the CEO of the MSC agencies, and that will continue to be the case.
Regarding mailing the packet, would it be possible to drop off the packet in person?
Tony, I think that's to you.
If it's on if you're on Staten Island and you're driving by, yes, you can leave it. Please know that there's people here in my office between 8:30 and 5, and safety can yeah, I guess you can leave it with safety. They'll call down here and make sure that somebody is aware. I'll talk to them as well. So the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
I was just trying to think through it as I was talking, which I probably shouldn't always do, but yes, make sure it's between the hours of 8:30 and 5.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Tony.
Monday through Friday.
Right.
Well, now we're just taking a look through all the questions.
I just want to advise the MSCs that since this information is going to the CEO of the MSC agency, you know, within a couple of days, you probably want to, if you haven't heard anything, you might want to touch base with them, because I know that sometimes trickling down information to the appropriate people can take some time. And since we are kind of on a tight time frame, we want to make sure that that you just reach out to them if for some reason you haven't received anything.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we'll post a tracking sheet with the training so that you are able to see it and know what it is and get started on gathering that information.
Good.
Sorry, we're just taking a moment to look through all the questions.
Just for clarification, if the consent forms are sent to Tawny, who will then distribute to the appropriate CAB representative, once that representative completes the consent forms, they will be sending them back to the MSC to complete the choices selection screen, correct?
Yes. Once the signature's on the consent forms, it's back with the MSC to complete those final steps, just like has been trained in all the other enrollment trainings, to complete the choices form and to get those consent forms to the CCO. Okay. I think we've completed all the questions that have been submitted. Tawny, did you want to say anything more as we close out?
No, you know, I did notice there was one question about class members, and this is specific down in the boroughs, Long Island, and Westchester and Rockland. For those class members that are in PHP, we're not looking to change that, and we shouldn't be getting packets.
Okay, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Thank you for that, Tawny. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, they're engaged in an already comprehensive managed care plan and would not need to, unless someone wanted to change, which Tawny's saying they do not, would not need to change out of that into the new CCO system.
One more question that came up a couple times is, we understand that all of this documentation will be sent snail mail to Tawny. Does it have to be certified mail, or can it just be regular mail?
No, it does not need to be certified mail. It can just be regular mail. Okay, very good.
Well, thank you again for your participation.
Thank you, everyone. Truly appreciate it from our end as well.
Great, thank you.